Turns out, short stories script. Imagine you're a teenager in Ethiopia. English isn't your native language. It's also the language your textbooks are written in, the language your future depends on understanding. And you're struggling. You're reading, sure, but the words aren't connecting into meaning. The comprehension isn't happening. So a teacher decides to try something weird. Instead of grammar drills and dense textbook passages, she starts handing out short stories. Just regular short stories. Stories about people, about conflict, about things that actually matter. And something shifts. The struggling readers suddenly start understanding, not just the words anymore, the meaning, the whole thing. So here's the question. Why would a story about a made-up person in a made-up situation teach you how to understand English better than exercises literally designed to teach you English? That's the question researchers in Northwest Ethiopia actually decided to answer, and their answer might change how we think about teaching reading entirely. Reading comprehension is foundational. It's not just an academic skill, it's the infrastructure of learning itself. You can't do science without it. You can't navigate the world without it. And in countries like Ethiopia, where English is the medium of instruction at secondary school level, meaning everything else you want to learn happens in English, reading comprehension isn't just important, it's a gate that many students are stuck behind. For years, educators have assumed the solution is obvious. Teach reading with reading materials designed specifically for teaching reading. Controlled vocabulary, progressive difficulty, comprehension questions. It's logical, it's systematic. It's also, as it turns out, possibly not the best we can do. Before this study, there was this background hum of research suggesting that authentic, engaging text might work better than engineered textbooks. But that's easier said than tested. This study actually tested it, in real classrooms, with real struggling students, and the results pushed back hard against the conventional wisdom. Johannes Gela and Bogale Ayal work at Waldia University in Ethiopia. Gela's in the English department, Ayal's in public health, which tells you something interesting about how interdisciplinary this research actually is. The study was published in June 2006 in PLoS One, one of the world's most widely read open-access journals. So this wasn't some small pilot study in an obscure venue. This was data serious enough to land in a major publication. It's the kind of work that happens in real universities, solving real problems in real classrooms, but it doesn't usually end up on people's radar because education research is weirdly less visible than, say, particle physics, which is backwards, because this affects billions of kids. Here's what they did. They took 120 ninth graders from secondary schools in Northwest Ethiopia. 2 entire class sections. These were random sections, random students, not pre-selected to be particularly struggling or particularly advanced. Then they split them. 60 students got the experimental treatment, 60 became the control group. Everyone took a reading comprehension test at the beginning. No surprise here, both groups were basically equivalent. They scored about the same. Then the experimental group spent weeks learning reading through short stories. Real short stories, engaging ones. The kind you'd actually want to read. Stories with narrative, character development, tension. The things that make stories work. Meanwhile, the control group did what they normally did. Regular English instruction, business as usual. Then both groups took the reading comprehension test again. It's like running 2 identical cars on 2 different fuels and seeing which one runs better. Except the fuel is pedagogical and the road is comprehension. The pretest showed what you'd expect. Both groups were indistinguishable. The t-statistic was 0.32, the p-value was 0.75. In plain English, that means no difference. Move along, nothing to see yet. But the post-test, that's where it gets interesting. The experimental group, the short stories group, scored an average of 10.38 out of whatever the maximum was. The control group scored 6.72. The p-value was 0.01. This is what statisticians call significant with a capital S. This isn't noise. This isn't the kind of result that could easily happen by chance. They were basically 3.5 points apart on the test, and that gap is real. When you do the math on effect size, which tells you how big the difference actually is, not just whether it's statistically meaningful, we're looking at a medium to large effect. Roughly speaking, if you had a student at the 50th percentile of the control group, the short stories intervention would bump them up to somewhere around the 69th percentile. That's meaningful classroom improvement. Here's the part that makes it even more interesting. The control group didn't get worse, but they didn't really get better either. Their reading comprehension stayed essentially flat over the study period. No significant change. The improvement happened entirely in the short stories group. Their reading comprehension actually improved, significantly, over time. So we're not just seeing differences between groups, we're seeing that short stories created actual growth, while standard instruction didn't produce measurable growth. The qualitative data, interviews with 7 students from the experimental group, painted a picture of why this might be happening. And this is the stuff that numbers alone don't capture. Students reported that short stories were more engaging. They said the narratives helped them understand context and meaning in ways that decontextualized grammar exercises didn't. They talked about caring about the characters and wanting to keep reading to find out what happened, which sounds obvious when you say it out loud. Of course, engaging material is more engaging, but here's why it matters. Engaging reading actually triggers deeper processing. When your brain is invested in a story, you're not just decoding words. You're constructing meaning, predicting, inferring, making connections. You're doing the cognitive work of comprehension instead of just doing the mechanical work of decoding. It's the difference between walking a path and actually paying attention to the landscape. So what does this mean practically? If you're a teacher or a parent trying to help a kid with reading, the implication is kind of radical. It suggests that the instinct to use teaching materials might be backwards. It suggests that real stories might actually teach reading comprehension better than texts engineered specifically to teach reading comprehension. This doesn't mean grammar doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you can ignore vocabulary. But it means that embedding vocabulary and grammar and comprehension instruction inside narratives that actually matter to the reader might be more effective than isolating those skills. It also complicates the story a bit. This study was done in Ethiopia, with students learning English as a foreign language in specific classrooms over a specific time period. The sample size of 120 is decent, but not enormous. There are always questions about generalizability. Would this work with first language readers, with younger kids, with different kinds of stories? The qualitative data comes from only 7 students, which is a small slice. And honestly, the control group's lack of improvement is a little suspicious. Were they bored? Was the instruction actively bad, or just less engaging? Those details matter. This research sits at the intersection of several wider conversations happening in education right now. There's the whole debate about phonics versus comprehension instruction, about the primacy of decoding skills versus meaning-making. There's the question of engagement and motivation in learning generally. Does motivation matter more than we've acknowledged? And there's something bigger about how we teach languages to non-native speakers. The traditional model has been input-focused. Give them controlled, gradual exposure to increasingly complex structures. But there's growing evidence that comprehensible input plus high engagement might beat comprehensible input plus low engagement. This study adds evidence to that side of the ledger. It also raises questions worth investigating next. What specifically about short stories creates comprehension gains? Is it narrative structure? Is it relatability of character? Is it intrinsic motivation? If you used boring short stories, would it still work? What happens if you compare short stories to other engaging, authentic texts? News articles, blog posts, comics? Does the effect persist over time or fade when the novelty wears off? Does it work for students at different proficiency levels? These are the kinds of follow-up questions that turn a single study into a research program. Here's the thing that actually blew my mind about this. Reading comprehension is the foundation of almost everything students do after they learn to read. It's not just about understanding English, it's about accessing information, building knowledge, functioning in academic spaces. And we've been approaching it like it's a technical skill to be engineered and tested. Like comprehension is something you extract from text through explicit instruction. But this research suggests that comprehension is something that emerges when you're genuinely invested in what you're reading, when the text means something, when you care. Which raises a genuinely provocative question. How much of the reading struggles we see in schools isn't actually about reading ability at all, but about reading disengagement? How many struggling readers are actually just